You are at the Grant Makers for Education Out of School Time Impact Group monthly convening. And we are going to spend an hour today, and we are happy that you're here. If everybody could start out by making sure you're muted and changing your Zoom name to include your organization and your pronouns. That helps us get to know each other. We are a fairly big group, and one of the things that we like to do is be the catalyst for people to make connections with each other. So if you all could just take a second to do that, that would be perfect. My name's Kathleen Traphagen, and I co-facilitate the Out of School Time Impact Group with Rebecca Goldberg. And our intro question today is, and you can answer this in the chat. So your name, your org, your preferred pronouns, and your favorite artist. Now, of course, that's hard. We're just asking for one. So maybe favorite artist today of any discipline. So go ahead and start answering that question in the chat while I set up our agenda for today. So today we are going to be talking about the potential, and I'd say, I'll do a little personal editorial here, responsibility of the out of school time youth development field to provide safe spaces and support the mental health and well-being and thriving of LGBTQ plus young people. And as we all know, these young people are under really toxic attack, and we all have the responsibility to step up and ensure that they know that people have their back, and there's specific practices and philosophies that we can do to do that. And so we've got a great panel today to tell us about that. And so we are joined today by three folks who, and thank the three of you for being here. We've got Keegan Miller, they, them, and Keegan is the public training manager at the Trevor Project. Michael Reardon, any pronouns, is with the Compass LGBTQ Community Center in Lake Worth, Florida. And Francisco Bushting, Vice President of Grants, Programs, and Communications at the Horizons Foundation in San Francisco. So welcome to all of you, and thank you again for being here. So we're going to start out, and I think we'll start out with Francisco. Could you just tell us a little bit about yourself and who you bring with you to your work and what your organization does?
Hello, everyone, and good to be here with everyone, and thank you so much for the invitation. I'm one of those people in philanthropy. I'm not a professional philanthropoid until I come back to the philanthropy side. I navigate between the nonprofit and the philanthropy side, and when I leave the philanthropy side, I'm like, why did I left? When I come back to the philanthropy side, I'm like, oh, I missed the nonprofit side. So, so I'm one of those folks that go back and forth. And who I bring to the meeting today is all those LGBT folks that honestly are elders who paved the way for me to even be here in this meeting and to be able to work at the first LGBT community foundation in the world. So it's really it's on their shoulders that I stand, and it's a privilege to be here. Thank you.
Thanks for that. That's really powerful to think about. Michael? Oh, you're on mute.
I got the oh, I'm going to start it like that. Hi, everyone. My name is Mike Reardon. I am with Compass LGBTQ plus Community Center, which is in Lake Worth Beach, Florida, which is in Palm Beach County. And if you don't know where that is, I wouldn't expect you to, but we're basically 4 miles away from Mar-a-Lago. So that's interesting, a little tidbit. So you just know, where we are on the map and what we're dealing with. I don't know if I said this already, I go by any pronouns. And with the question of who do I bring with me to work? Who's that person that inspires me? It's an interesting question. And I was trying to think of that one first. And then I am a marketer by trade. I'm the director of media and communications for Compass. But I'm going to give what I feel is a social work working answer. Honestly, it's the last person that you couldn't help. It's that person that came in, was looking for services or needed help, and that we just didn't have the resources, or it wasn't our lane, whatever it was. That's who it always is constantly thinking about, because when they come in, and if we can't help them, we got to figure out how we can help them in the future, anybody else coming in. So that's kind of, I think that's why a lot of us are in this work, and that's who I bring with me.
Yeah, thanks for that. And Keegan?
Hi, friends. My name is Keegan Miller. I use they, them pronouns, and I'm actually the interim director of public training, recent title change. So very exciting.
Oh,
Yeah, I know, right?
congratulations, you.
Thank you. The Trevor Project, we focus on crisis intervention and prevention work for our LGBTQ youth. And I think when you ask about the space of who I bring with me, I take a little bit of the opposite approach, I think, of Michael, and that I think about the messages that we get from both youth that we've provided services to, as well as their parents who have said thank you. We reached out and this helped, and this helped move us on, and we're in a much better place now, right? And I think about how we can create a world in which more young people can experience that feeling of support and sometimes even joy, right? Of just being in a better place.
Yeah, excellent. And I'm glad you brought up the word joy, because I do, and all of you mentioned this to me when we were thinking about this agenda, how important it is to keep that, part of the responsibility is to create those spaces for joy and thriving. And I think we'll talk more about that as we go. So the way that we're going to set up this conversation is Keegan is going to do some level setting for us about what's happening. And from the Trevor Project, which is the sort of perfect standpoint as a national organization that is in touch with young people, many, many young people, keeping track of how they're feeling, what they're doing, and also the overall context of what's happening. So Keegan's going to go through that for like 10 minutes or so, and then we're going to go into a conversation about what all of us have the responsibility to be doing. So take it away.
Remember to hit all the buttons. Okay. Hi, friends. So again, I want to just put this in the framework that the Trevor Project, we are working to end LGBTQ suicide, and that's an urgent mission. And I'm going to talk a bit about why it's such an urgent mission right now as we go through this. So we're sitting in a world where there's a lot of negativity surrounding our LGBTQ community, but particularly our LGBTQ youth. A record number of anti-LGBTQ bills have been introduced this year. Currently, we're tracking 658 anti-LGBTQ bills across this entire country. And that's in 46 different states, mind you. So it's not just the states that you might think of. It's not just the communities that you might generally be like, oh yeah, of course it would be there. It's all across this country. And they're having a negative impact on LGBTQ youth mental health. Of those 658 bills this year, 69 have been enacted. Conversely, we do have laws that are protecting LGBTQ young people from things like conversion therapy, and other bills that help enforce non-discrimination, bills that proactively seek to provide healthcare for trans individuals, those types of things. But out of those bills, there's only 190 of those compared to the 658 anti-bills, and only 9 of those bills have been enacted across this country. So we have a lot of work to do. And some of the bills that have been passed this year are things like healthcare bans. So preventing trans individuals from getting healthcare, particularly our younger trans folks. Bathroom bans, so saying that you can't use the bathroom of how you identify, but rather of the sex you were assigned at birth, which is really interesting for those who have transitioned, particularly. Bans on sports that would prohibit folks from playing in the sports teams. This is again focused on our young people, from playing in sports of how they identify, and that goes all the way down into elementary school oftentimes, which is goofy on so many levels. School mandates, so things like asking teachers to out LGBTQ students to their parents if they come out at school. Schools that ban people, teachers and administrators from using the pronouns that a person chooses for themselves. Bans on drag shows in a variety of different ways. Religious exemptions that would allow religious practitioners to say no to care for trans people. That includes general medical care. So if a trans person walks in with a broken arm, just by them being trans, a religious provider would be able to claim a religious exemption to say, I'm not treating this person. Book bans, and so many more things across this country. As a result, nearly 1 in 3 young people, LGBTQ young people, said that their mental health was poor most or all of the time due to these pieces of legislation and policies. 2 out of 3 young people said that they heard about state or local laws banning people from discussing LGBTQ people at their school, and that made their mental health a lot worse. On the flip side, again, I always want to point out, it's not just about risk factors, but it's also about protective factors. And we know that 79% of our young people said that hearing about a state or local laws trying to ban conversion therapy, which, by the way, conversion therapy is this discredited practice of the idea that you can change someone's sexual orientation or gender identity through, quote, therapeutic means. So by banning that, they do feel better. So when we are doing these positive things, it does help. But unfortunately, the wave, as noted, is so huge on the anti side. And our young people are watching, they're paying attention. You know, to what extent do you pay attention to media reports about the rights for LGBTQ folks? 85% said somewhat or a lot. That is a very large percentage of our LGBTQ young people who are watching as politicians use them as political pawns. When it comes to access of care, a lot of people ask, you know, how many of our young people are actually seeking gender affirming care, are being serviced by gender affirming care in some way. Among our trans and non-binary young people, 11% said they were on gender affirming hormones, and 2% said they took that they were on puberty blockers. That's a very small percentage of our young people, especially with the media around trans young folks. There's this idea that everyone is getting access to care all overnight, and it's kind of blown up disproportionately to what the actual numbers are. And for those who were on gender affirming hormones, 65% were concerned about losing access to this care. Again, more than 65% or 65% of our youth do not live in the states that have actually banned that care. So just the idea of a bill being introduced that would ban that care is enough to really concern people. It's not just about physical care either, though. It's also about mental health care and the access that folks have to that. And, you know, 56% of our LGBTQ youth said they wanted care, but were unable to receive it in the past year. That number is a bit higher for our trans and non-binary young people. There are lots of reasons why our young folks can't receive the care that they need and deserve. It kind of fits into 3 main buckets. The first is around accessibility. So not having health insurance that covers mental health care, or maybe the deductible's too high. Maybe they have to travel too far away to get care, those types of things. The second bucket is around mental health stigma. So being afraid of asking for care, being dismissed, like it's not that big of a deal, you'll be fine kind of thing. Just anything to deal with mental health stigma. And then the third is around LGBTQ identities. So am I going to be outed by my therapist to my parents? Is my therapist even going to understand my identity as an LGBTQ person? So all of those 3 buckets of access to care, direct access, mental health stigma, and LGBTQ identities really impacts how our young people are able to seek and access the care that they should be getting. And there's the top 10 barriers to care up on your screen there. Again, kind of fitting into those 3 buckets if you really read through those. And so all of this is to say that our young people are suffering because of this the way that society is treating them. And that's the thing, I'm about to talk about suicidality and mental health issues, but I don't want us to think that these mental health issues are innate in someone, but it's how society is stigmatizing and mistreating the community and its impact on mental health and well-being. So 41% of our young people said that they seriously considered attempting suicide in the past year. Those numbers jump up a little bit more when we're talking about our trans and non-binary young people, being half of trans and non-binary youth saying that. And then 14% of our LGBTQ young people said that they attempted suicide in the past year, including nearly 1 in 5 trans folks. So again, seeing higher rates amongst our trans and non-binary youth. Similarly, we see disproportionately high rates of anxiety and depression amongst our LGBTQ young people, particularly our trans and non-binary youth, with 67% reporting experiencing symptoms of anxiety, 54% reporting experiencing symptoms of depression. And we're going to stop there and we'll come back to that. But our young people are not doing well. And it's not because of who they are, it's how they're being interacted with in society. Their risk factors are high, there's lack of support, and there's things that are vehemently against them. And those protective factors are low. Safe and affirming spaces, places that they can go and feel support. And those are the things that we really need to talk about and work on some more.
Thank you for that, Keegan. And we will be able to share that deck, yes?
Yes.
Okay, great. We'll definitely share that deck after. And that was really super comprehensive and quite sobering. And before we move on, I just want to give Michael and Francisco a chance to ask any questions that have come up for you on what you just heard from Keegan.
How do you mean, like people contacting us, or what questions we have?
No, any questions like from the deck, like anything, that surprised you or that you wanted to dig into a little bit more before we move on? Yeah.
Unfortunately, none of it surprised me. And I've seen high numbers before for a while. I know that it's getting worse. It's almost to the point where and I hate to say, you're looking at numbers on the screen, starts to get desensitized. You just like, oh, okay, 41% have seriously considered suicide. And until you take a number like that and bring it out and say, what does that actually mean? That's 4 out of every 10 people. If you round up to 50%, which it's really close to, that's 1 out of every 2 people. That's just wild, and it's unfortunate. But thank you for sharing it, because it's incredibly important.
I would echo that, and the numbers unfortunately are not surprising. And I think it speaks a little bit to the topic today, because we also know the numbers of the amount of violence and harassment that youths experience in schools, and that comes from federal surveys and even San Francisco Unified District that you think, right? San Francisco dependency of LGBTQ acceptance, high level of violence toward LGBTQ youth. So those numbers are not similar. So I think the topic today is even more important, because sometimes after school is where youth find some refuge or some semblance of peace that they may not get at school or at home. So thank you for sharing that.
And we have one question about just how you define young people, Keegan, in terms of age.
So at Trevor, we define young folks as 24 and under. That national survey surveys folks who are 13 to 24. That's based on like IRB standards. So 13 to 24 is where those stats come from, but we define young people as under 24.
Okay, great. And I'd say I had definitely would reinforce the comments from Michael and Francisco. And I also, what you said in the beginning about the attacks from adults legislatively, in the public conversation, narrative, et cetera. I think one of the things that is important is that for those of us who live in, you know, blue states or whatever, and in places that feel that this doesn't happen in our place, there's sort of a dangerous like sense of complacency, I think, that happens with, and I'll just mention on like a personal note, I live in Amherst, Massachusetts, which is a place that generally has a fairly, you know, solid reputation of being progressive. And we just are in the midst of a real reckoning because our middle school, which serves our 7th and 8th graders, which actually over, I'd say, you know, the last 10 to 15 years or so did have a well-deserved reputation as being a very protective and welcoming place for young people with all gender identities, has just been the source that it's basically come to light. And the way that it's come to light is high school journalists. So really I have to, like, you know, give them all the credits. Our high school journalists have broken a story of just transgender abuse by guidance counselors and bullying and ignoring of the bullying. And like for me, kind of because my kids went to this school, sort of unbelievable, like, and very much of a like comeuppance, I think, for, I would say, me and everybody in town of like, wait, what? This is not us. But of course, yes. And so one of one of the teachers at our high school, which actually Sarah Barbara Just is the person who created the first LGBTQ literature course, which is taught at our high school. And she's also the journalist advisor. And she said, this just takes an amazing amount of vigilance every single day. No matter what you think you've done in the past, it's what you're doing today, right now. And that was just like very, a lot of things that we've been learning. So I just wanted to share that quick story because your piece about no one is living in a place that is immune from this, no matter what our politicians are. So I think we're going to go, and I will drop that in the chat, the article for sure. So we're going to move now, and if people keep the conversation up in our chat too, but we're going to move now to what it is that we can all do, how we need to step up. And so we'll go back to Keegan sharing your screen for a bit, and then we're going to bring Michael and Francisco into the conversation as well.
Perfect. So things that we know from the survey as ways to support people, right? We know that when young people have access to affirming spaces and have folks in their lives that support them and know the basics of LGBTQ identities, they report lower rates of attempting suicide. So that means affirming homes, schools, community events, online spaces, all of those places had lower rates of attempting suicide when they had access to those things than those who did not. That disproportionately, again, impacts folks around trans and non-binary issues of like affirming gender identity. So simple things like affirming someone by using the pronouns that they go by. We know that when folks reporting having people that they live with respect their pronouns, most or all of the time, it lowers that suicide risk. And here's what that looks like. You know, when all the people that they live with, you know, we're seeing 12% rates of attempting suicide versus 20 and 21% when it's some or none. So when you live in that fully affirming space, it lowers that suicide risk. That goes for things like accessing the bathroom too. And I would like to point out that having access to gender neutral bathrooms, you know, this was a question about school, but this can be replicated in community centers. It can be replicated in faith communities, you know, anywhere where a person is going to be and need to use the restroom. You're gonna see less access in some of those spaces, unfortunately. In schools, we're seeing that, you know, 37% of our young people have access to a gender neutral bathroom. Oftentimes, mind you, that bathroom is like in the nurse's station or other inconvenient places for folks. But when we see that access, again, we see lower attempted suicide rates. It's all about providing affirming spaces. And by having something as basic as a gender neutral bathroom, so someone can go to the bath, use the restroom whenever they need to, that's enough to make a difference. That goes for like things like binders, shapewear, affirming clothing. Again, when folks have access, we see significantly lower rates of suicide attempts. I also like to use the words from our young people. And so we asked our young people what a world would look like where all people are accepted and like how that would make them feel. And you can see this word cloud here. I think, peaceful, happy, normal, better, like all of these things. This is the world that we envision for our LGBTQ youth. And it's what they envision for themselves. And, what does that look like for folks? People are able to express themselves. They can be who they want. They can just exist. Our LGBTQ young people, I think we oftentimes forget, like, they're kids. And they're not able to just be kids so frequently because they're dealing with all this other stuff. I used to work at a camp for transgender youth, and it was one of the most beautiful things to see kids just being kids. We loved when we had like the camp problems, someone was sneaking out at night, or someone brought something to camp that they weren't supposed to have. Those were the best problems ever because they were just typical kid problems, right? It had nothing to do with the kiddos being trans. When the kid climbed the wall for the first time and was celebrated, it was just a kid being a kid. And that's, what we really want for our LGBTQ youth, a world where they're just accepted for who they are and they can grow up and live their lives the best that they can.
Yeah, thank you for that. I love that last couple of slides with those quotes from the young people. So I have a quick question actually that I'd like to ask the three of you to respond to, and then gonna have a few other questions, but folks should put questions in the chat too. So I know one thing we haven't talked about yet, and I'd like each of you to talk about it, is in your work, what do you see around the particular toxicity that's faced by young people who have identities of LGBTQ and other gender identities, and are also either Black, Indigenous, and other people of color, and how those identities intersect, and what are the particular damage and risks that those young people are facing? And do you delineate your data that way too at the Trevor Project? And do you see what do you see there?
Sure. So yes, we do. And actually, we're really proud of our survey for being one of the more diverse LGBTQ surveys out there. A lot of LGBTQ surveys are like 80% white. Ours is like 50-50. And so there's still some room for growth there, but like at least it's a positive direction. And we're always looking for ways to improve that. We also delineate by region of the country that folks live in as well. And you can find all of that data on our website if you're interested in looking at that more specifically. But just to give a couple of examples, we do see higher rates of suicide attempt and anxiety and depression amongst our LGBTQ youth of color. We see higher rates of discrimination, particularly, which is probably causing those higher rates of suicidality and whatnot. But even when it comes to things like care, right? I mentioned all of the barriers to accessing care for LGBTQ youth. Does my therapist understand my identity as an LGBTQ person? Is in the 20-something, I think it's 26%. That number almost doubles when we're talking about LGBTQ youth of color, because then their question is, does this therapist understand my identity as an LGBTQ person, as a person in my race, and where those things intersect? And too often we get pulled into this space where LGBTQ people are considered to be like a monolith, and we're not, right? We have so much diversity within our own community. We have so much bias within our own community sometimes that we need to work on. And so, yeah, we have to acknowledge that those things increase when we're talking about our LGBTQ youth of color.
Yeah, thank you for that. Michael, would you like to get in on that question?
Sure. This is a more difficult one for me to answer because there are different ways to look at it, I think. And you asked, reporting and data collecting. I'm actually not a member of the youth program. They collect all that data. They're running the things. And so I think from that perspective, I'm sure that we're gathering information. But how does that impact our practice? What is it that we do here at the center? We're open to anybody, right? We're open to anyone who wants it. We find that the youth are incredibly, what's the word? Resilient, right? They have this ability to come in and just be with each other, be with them, be themselves, and be open and accepting. The challenge really for this kind of thing when we're talking about intersectionalities is how do we communicate with the parents? How do we communicate? So we're in South Florida. We have a large Latin population. We have a large Black population, but we also have a large community from the islands. And the islands traditionally aren't the most welcoming places for LGBTQ people. And we have to compete with that. So it's from the perspective of who's using the services and how do we get them and what do we do when we're here. The youth who come in are fun. You know, when they get here, when they find the space, when they are able to have all of those things that Kagan's talking about, acceptance of a place where they don't have to worry about being themselves. It's really the communication with the parents that becomes the bigger barrier for us. And how do we, you know, take some of those things that you mentioned, race out of it, religious leanings, religious backgrounds, all of the messaging that people are seeing out there, how is that impacting us? And that's where we find the difficulties is every time a new kid comes into the program, it's having that conversation with those parents to ensure them that this is a safe place. This is, you know, just a place where kids are coming to be themselves for a couple hours a week. That's where that is a bigger barrier for us.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned parents and guardians, and I want to circle back to that. But first, I'll let Francisco get in there on this question.
Yeah, I'll respond this from the.
Did we collect data on race? Oh, I'm so sorry. I hit the wrong button.
That's okay. That's good for you to be investigating. But if you want to mute yourself to find that out,
I'll be back. Then it's so I apologize so much.
Not at all.
No problem. I'll start by responding this from the philanthropy side. You know, as a foundation, we collect data, and this is very purposeful in the way we design our taxonomy, that we code everything, not just but what we fund, but who we are funding. And that's important, especially for any youth programming, because I think it speaks to the intersectionality of the LGBTQ community. You can slice, cut us in so many different ways demographically. We're represented in every part of society. So then, you know, as a funder, how is it that we're going to make sure that that what we fund funds all parts of the community, funds all of us in the way we represent it, in the way we show up. We know that youth, LGBTQ youth of color, sometimes they prefer to be in a space that adheres more to maybe their race, ethnic background, and not so much LGBTQ, as long as that place is affirming and accepting, and sometimes vice versa, that they find, you know, more congruence within an LGBTQ space that's welcoming of both race and ethnicity. So, you know, it's not a one solution piece, but from a funder's perspective, it is key to be able to really look at not only what we're funding, but who we are funding. And that's collecting data on race, ethnicity, and sexual orientation data on the staff, the board, and who they serve. It's a little more work, but at the end, I think we can have more robust conversations, not only with our grantee partners, but with the board and with the staff of those organizations. The other piece around the programming, and I think that's, I'll speak a little bit in terms of horizons. We view our bread and butter to be the grassroots organizations. We feel that's where the rubber meets the road. We do fund big, large groups. We have a history of doing that. We continue to do that. But at the end of the day, it's really those grassroots, because that's where the best ideas come from in terms of what programming looks like for a very diverse community. What programming may look like when you're under attack by civil leaders, when and you have to really put together an interesting program to make it happen. And then taking a further step back, that this is not new for us. We've seen this film before. We've seen this playbook before, and we're still here. And I think what's different is the amplification of it. And yes, the proliferation of it. So then when we think of where has some of our best ideas for a movement have happened, it's happened at the grassroots level. And for I think for foundations, sometimes it's very hard to think of how do I fund grassroots? And if you have the infrastructure to do that, go ahead. If you don't, then I would say there's an opportunity to partner with community foundations as we grant your partnerships. We have over 9 LGBTQ community foundations throughout this country. And if you don't have the infrastructure or the staff or the internal capacity on how to reach down to really where the grassroots are happening, where change is happening, and where direct service is happening in a very specific, calculated way, there's that opportunity.
Right. Okay, that's good. And I think trying to synthesize also that already what's come out about practices that both, so we've got a mix of folks here who are in all sorts of different roles within the field, and then also funders, right? So I think already between Michael and Keegan and yourself, we've named that certainly understanding what it is to be a fully affirming space is key. So if you're in a position of in an organization where you are running an after-school summer program, is that the kind of space that you are actually, offering to young people, and what that specifically means? And so we've talked about some of the things that shouldn't be that hard, but end up being complicated, but certainly respect for and use of people's preferred pronouns, and then gender affirming bathrooms has been also mentioned by Keegan and in your data. And I'd love to hear from Michael, you're our sort of, okay, you are on the ground and young people are coming to your space every day in Florida, which is no easy place to be these days. And so can you talk about some of the other things that you do to ensure that your space is fully affirming? And I also want you to specifically talk about joy. And I loved how Keegan brought out kids should be kids, right? And that's something that, we should not forget. So how do you also create a space of joy?
Where to come in on that, right? And first, I wanted to apologize again, Francisco, for what I just did. That's like one of the Zoom faux pas, right? It's going to keep me up all weekend. I'm going to be like, I can't believe I did that. But how do we provide joy? I don't think it's a complicated answer, to tell you the truth. It's listen to them, listen to the kids, and just create a place where they can be themselves. It's not that hard to respect people. It really isn't. These very basic human behaviors that decent people practice all the time, somehow when we apply it to LGBTQ youth, gets all twisted and perverted into this, well, I can't do that. For example, I used to be a school teacher, actually, and we had something called homeroom. And on the first day of school, homeroom was very important because people would come in, they would sit down, the teacher would have a list of names, legal names, and they would do roll call, right? They would take attendance to see who's there in their class. And as they're going kid by kid, every kid that they got to, they would say, oh, I'm here. And then if there was something they wanted the teacher to know, they would say it. For example, my name is Michael. When I was in school, if they got to me, I would say, call me Mike. I mean, the teachers would even ask, what's your nickname, right? Mike. No problem. They'd cross it out. They'd make a note in their attendance sheet, and I'm Mike for the rest of the year. no issues. But that same scenario, if I had asked them to call me Michelle, all of a sudden, it just all becomes too much. Like I refuse to do that. That's not your legal name. I mean, how many of us go by nicknames? Like this is what I'm saying, like a normal social behavior where you would just extend a courtesy to any human being. You meet somebody new, and you say, oh, hi, my name is, people are going to use that name, it's not rocket science here. It's not some magical formula of we have to have this or do this or have this sign or this flag, or it's just treating people with respect and decency. I mean, that's what it is, and that's what we do here, and that's what we practice is normalizing life, normalizing daily interactions with people, proving and showing these young kids that there is nothing inherently wrong with them, which is what these laws are doing, right? That is the message that these laws are sending, and they're not directed just at our youth. They are directed at everyone in our society, and they are using youth as the vehicle to get that message through and across. So here at the center, we work on proving that is not correct. And you talk about joy. Joy's not that far behind when you respect people. They get together, laugh, see each other, people like, see people like them in these spaces. You don't have to teach kids joy. That's I think a youth's natural state. We teach them everything else. We teach them anxiety, hate, all of that stuff, right? But the kids are naturally joyful. If you create a space where that joy can blossom, it's going to, and you don't have to do much. You just have to respect them.
Yeah, thanks for that. And Keegan, do you want to get in at all there around what else you see from the folks that you work with?
Sure. So, I get the joy of working with community organizations all over the country doing trainings. Actually, one of the questions in the chat is about training for preparing staff to work with LGBTQ youth. We do that here at Trevor. You can reach out to us, and we'd be happy to work with those organizations, just as a plug there. But what's interesting is, a lot of people want to help. A lot of people want to be supportive of LGBTQ young people, and they just don't know how. And so one of the biggest things that we can focus on is making sure that folks have the education, that they have that training, that they have reinforcement of that training. So that's the first piece. The second piece is having policy that follows that information, right? We can talk about protecting our young people's identities. We can talk about all these things until we're blue in the face. But if there's not a policy that supports non-discrimination, if there's not a policy that supports people using the pronouns and names that they go by everywhere else, if there's not the administrative side of that, the reinforcement there isn't going to be solid. And then when you do have bad actors that, unfortunately pop up on occasion, you don't have any recourse if that policy doesn't exist within your organization. So I've seen organizations that have really focused on making sure all of that is aligned, right? And then when it comes to working with our young people overall, I've seen orgs that do really well with dealing with things like bullying and harassment, because we unfortunately teach our kids how to do those things too. And then we have to address them when they come up, and we can't just ignore it. Our partners over at GLSEN have a lot of really great resources on teaching about bullying, harassment, about inclusion of others to our young people. And I always suggest them and their resources for folks who are working directly with our young people to make sure that they're providing an inclusive environment for their peers.
Yeah, thanks for that. And we'll get some of those specifics, and feel free to drop in the chat. I always hate to ask people to multitask, because I think science says that you actually can't do that. But we will definitely get all specific resources and share them. And thanks for those of you who are keeping up the conversation in the chat. I want to bring one question that Mac put in there. Thank you for that question, Mac, and bring it to Francisco, which is from funder to funder. Are there practices that you have to assess the authenticity of folks' commitment to providing affirmative spaces and being and I think when we were talking before this call, you were also making the point about like you know, you have to engage the people that are there and the programs that are there for young people, no matter, so if you could talk about that a little bit, about you as a funder doing that, that would be great.
Yeah, and I think this cuts across not just funders. Like where I work, I was an affinity funder, right? We fund a specific part of the population, but funders across, we know that there's some folks that are going to chase dollars. They're, and I've gotten those type of applications as well, where it's like, oh, we have a trans program, and then we look at, do you have anybody on staff leading that program? What's the level of expertise? I think it's asking those questions that we do as funders, in terms of going maybe just a little bit deeper and looking at what they're reporting as their data, who they serve, who's on staff, what's their experience around that, and have sometimes having a very uncomfortable conversation, because we know some folks will chase dollars in the programming. For a host of reasons, but I've had those situations where we have a trans program, but there's not a single trans person leading that program.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
I think there's other things that as a funder that we can do, and one is looking at the non-discrimination policy. What does the policy really state, both for the non-discrimination policy as an employer, as well as non-discrimination policy as a provider? Sometimes there's a disconnect. So I think it's those little signals that I would say, in talking about queer youth and LGBTQ people in general, where we become amazingly adept to look for little signals in society that tells us this is a safe space, this is a safe organization. And I think we as funders, we need to look for some of those signals that tells us this is a legitimate organization, there's a legitimate space where we can really trust that the resources that we provide are going to be used to the best way possible. But let me take a step back a little bit, because I always say that sometimes the phone calls coming from within the house itself. So LGBTQ funders, an affinity group just like this one, put a report out a few years ago in terms of the level of homophobia and closet within philanthropy itself.
Mm.
How many people in philanthropy do not feel comfortable being out to their philanthropic employer? So I think it's kind of taking a step back and saying, who you as an organization, what are your policies? How do you make it welcoming? Who's your staff? And then looking, going out further, what are the non-discrimination policies or statements that you have for your grantees to sign when they receive that award? Is it really comprehensive? Does it reflect non-discrimination policies around every part of our community, including LGBTQ folks? So I think it's those signals. I think the other piece is sometimes, what does equity look like, or equitable resources? And once again, this is from LGBTQ funders, and this is the last data report that they released. There's one that's going to come out pretty soon, but in 2020, out of every $100 awarded by U.S. foundations in the U.S., only 23 cents specifically supported LGBTQ communities. So we're talking here.
Can you just say that again, so that we all sink that in?
Out of the billions of dollars that we have the privilege to put out in the field on an annual basis, out of every $100 of those $1 billion, only 23 cents were specifically for LGBTQ communities. They have another report where they look at dollars for trans services, and it's even less. So, so I think that, that one of the good things that as a field that we've been able to amass a significant amount of data to provide, to give other funders ammunition to talk to their boards or talk to their leaders and kind of go, hey, this is what we may need to do. And then I just want to address one of the questions that was in the chat in terms of, how do you locate groups and things like that, or partner with groups? It's not a perfect resource, but if you're looking for grassroots organizations, Horizons Foundation, we host a National Day of Giving for the LGBTQ community. It's giveaday.org. The only reason why I bring it up is because there we partner with over 700 organizations, LGBTQ organizations and programs throughout the 50 states, DC and Puerto Rico, where you can search by state. So if your funding focus at a specific state, you can put in Kentucky and see what are the LGBTQ programs that are participating in Give Out Day. Like I said, it's not comprehensive. And then you can also filter by whether it's a youth program, a general program, a center, and to look at who you can want to partner up with.
Thank you for bringing that up. And I did just put in the chat that I included that link in the resource sheet for this program. And we will also take the chat and make sure that we include anything that anybody has shared. So we are coming to the end of our time. So I just want to make sure that if folks if you're thinking about dropping a resource in the chat, do it now so that we can grab that. And we can make sure that everybody has that. And I think what we'll do, and I really appreciate all these things that you just said, Francisco, about like sort of funder to funder, and particularly the piece about looking at your own house. And I think that is this often comes up when we talk about youth voice too, and those of us who join us a lot, that won't be any surprise either, that, funders should and have the responsibility to build the capacity of their grantees to authentically engage youth voice. And at the same time, philanthropy needs to look at its own house about its practices around that too, and its own, decisions for philanthropic giving. So I think this is kind of a theme and just stuff to work on. So I wanted to turn it to Keegan and Michael before we close out about, one thing I wanted you to address, and then just whatever else you want to say as a quick sum up. But you did in the beginning, Keegan, paint a pretty grim picture of how we're doing legislatively, and it's just not that good. I don't want to end on a down note, but I do want you to sort of talk about what you think funders can do around that, because clearly resources are needed to move and to start winning on that. So I'll give it to you, and then you can pop it to Michael.
Yeah. So here's the thing, is that ultimately the vast majority of the anti-LGBTQ legislation that we see out there is due to lack of education of the general public. Because there are always going to be extremist ideas that come into politics. That's always going to be a part of life, that on either side. Let's be clear about that. And oftentimes, particularly nonprofits can't really influence legislators in certain ways, but what they can do is educate. And it's super important that we're educating folks, because the more people realize that how these issues impact individuals, when we can put faces and names to these issues, when people understand how, their next door neighbor or their grandchild or their whoever is being impacted, and how ludicrous some of these bills are, those are the people that are then going to call their legislators, that are going to show up at the state house, that are going to really be the influence of the decisions that our politicians are making. They're going to become the louder voice in the room. And that's what we really need, is we need our allies to become the louder voice in the room. And so when we're thinking about funding organizations, the more that we're focused on educating the public, the more that we're focused on creating community connections for our LGBTQ people, the better off we're going to be.
Great. And Michael, give us like 60 seconds.
Sure, I echo a great deal of that. I think that it is important to know that this is not going to last forever. We have a lot of work to do. As Francisco said before, we've been here before. This is the same arguments that we've seen in the past. There is a fever right now, and it needs to burn out. And I hope that it is. I hope that it will, as these laws go into effect, the devastating consequences of them become apparent. It is tough at the moment, but it is important to support each other. It's important to remember that this is a temporary moment. We're going to get through this. And it's so much right now. It's coming from so many places. I can tell you all, I want to end this on a positive note. We do a lot of activities in the community. We are, like I mentioned at the beginning, we are 4 miles away from Mar-a-Lago. We should be in the hotbed of this thing. We have had several events this year. Not a single protester has shown up. Not a single person trying to stop us from celebrating joy has come. I think that a lot of this is in the media, in the legislatures. This is going to pass, but there is work to do. And with things like this, education is crucial. It's absolutely crucial. And being visible, being seen, normal, that we're normal people. I hate using that word, but we're mothers, fathers, daughters, sisters, sons, all of that, uncles, aunts, friends, we're human beings, and that's going to come out. People are going to remember it before the end.
Yeah, great. Well, I think that's a super fitting way to close. And I just want to close with a, deep gratitude to the three of you for taking the time, for all you do every day. And we learned a lot from you, and I hope we can continue to learn from you. We have your contact information, and now that you're part of our community, you are going to be part of our community. And I also want to say, if anybody wants to continue talking and learning from these three, we are happy to, facilitate that. So reach out to us too. And I want everybody to have a terrific weekend and experiencing some joy, please.